Hi, I'm Linda Eedes from Foord Asset Management, and I'm here today with Dhersan Chetty, who is one of our senior investment analysts at Foord, and he specifically looks at many companies in the healthcare sector. And today we're talking about the recent NHI bill, which was signed into law by President Ramaphosa. Now, Dhersan, proponents of this bill say that it is going to provide broader healthcare for everyone in South Africa, and that surely is a good thing. But critics say that it is unworkable, unconstitutional, and quite frankly, unaffordable. And we've recently seen the likes of Trade Union Solidarity and also the Board of Healthcare Funders actually putting forward legal action against this bill. Let's start with the bill itself. Can you please clarify what this actually means in practice, this bill being signed into law, in terms of where we actually are in this process?
So now that this bill has been signed into law, you have to take 2 years to create the board, the structure, and the systems. Then it's going to take another 2 years to work out how the draft regulation is going to be to run the NHI, and that needs to go to public comment, which could take another 2 years. Then you need to go into creating the banking systems, the monitoring systems, and then also transfer all the assets, which would take another 2 years. So potentially it'll take about 6 to 7 years before the NHI can start contracting with the private sector, excluding any court challenges. So for you as a citizen, nothing's going to change until the NHI has enough funds to actually provide free healthcare cover for all procedures to the entire country. So medical schemes will still exist until that happens.
So, Dhersan, it sounds like there's still a lot of water to go under the bridge. I just wanted to clarify something before we actually continue the conversation. A lot of people confuse the concept of NHI, which stands for National Health Insurance, with the UK system, which is the NHS, which is their national health system. Can you just discuss the difference between those two, please?
So the UK NHS system is a dual system. So NHS, which offers free healthcare, works alongside a private sector that offers private medical aid. What the NHI plans to do, or its ultimate long-term goal, is to remove medical schemes entirely. So they want to be a single payer for healthcare for the country. So how that works is that once the NHI, according to Section 33, which is the most contentious part of the bill, once the NHI is able to fully cover a procedure, medical schemes can no longer cover that. So for example, in hip replacements, if the NHI has enough money to cover all hip replacements for every single person in this country, the medical schemes can't cover hip replacements anymore. So it's going to be a long time for that, but that's the difference, is that the NHI wants to be a single payer.
Okay, but now, Dhersan, if the NHI is reliant also on private healthcare providers who are then reimbursed by government, would this not be a good thing for private healthcare providers in South Africa? Why has the sector reacted so negatively to this news?
So in the short to medium term, it could be even the long term, but in the medium term, the private sector would benefit from contracting with the NHI to fill up spare capacity. But what the market and the consumers are worried about is that medical schemes won't exist, and you'll have an NHI as a single payer, and that single payer might not be stable, might not be able to execute. And then also with an NHI system, you don't know how much of pricing pressure there's going to be because you're going to be a single payer. Then the other issue is that if NHI then pays for specialists, is those fees also going to be compromised? And then what will happen is that they fear that specialists will leave because they don't be paid by the government. And then the other issue is that if it's going to be funded by taxation, then consumers are going to be double taxed. And that might have an impact on medical scheme lives while they have this concurrent system. But most likely it'll be a sliding tax scale. So the wealthy would be taxed more than the poor.
And so, Dhersan, with this recent development, with the actual NHI bill actually being signing into law, does this change our outlook on the prospective timeline for implementation?
No. So I expected the president to sign the bill or the act earlier, but potentially he delayed it because he was concerned about the backlash from the public before elections. In terms of the implementation, now, the implementation of NHI it's only feasible if there's funding, and there isn't funding for it. So to give you context, the funding needed is 200 billion rand, according to the government's conservative estimate per year. Now, to fund that, you'd need, to put it into context, it would account for 36% of payroll tax and 62% of corporate tax. So it's an enormous amount of taxation that's needed to fully fund NHI. So from an implementation point of view, there is, if Treasury allows it, in a coalition government, firstly, and if it even passes the constitutional challenges, there could be a payroll tax, but that payroll tax will not be large enough to fund NHI. So it'll be partially funded, which means that they'll use that funding to improve the primary healthcare clinics, to upgrade the public hospitals, and then to also contract with the NHI. But the amount of funds needed that would make medical schemes obsolete, where every citizen can go for free healthcare, is multi-decades away and unlikely.
And then obviously, Dhersan, I mean, we're here to actually understand the impact of all of this on the companies that we own. Could you comment on how this impacts some of the companies that we have in Foord portfolios today?
So the most exposed to this regulation or this act is actually the medical schemes. And we don't have any exposure to medical schemes like Discovery. For hospitals, there's in the short term, there'll be no impact because of the challenges and how long it's going to take to create the NHI fund. In the medium term to long term, potentially there's a benefit from contracting with the NHI to fill up spare capacity. And then in the long term, if you had to look at the various scenarios, the first is that Section 33, if it remains in part of the NHI Act, which says that anything that the NHI covers cannot be covered by a medical scheme. If that remains, you'd need the public hospitals to be accredited. So here is where it gets complex. So at the moment, there are very few public hospitals that can actually contract with the NHI because they need to have a certain level of quality. So at this moment, only private hospitals potentially can be accredited to have that level of quality. Because if you are trying to create an NHI system, you need to have everyone going to the same level of quality of hospital care. So for that, it's only when the public hospitals have a similar quality to a private hospital sector and they have enough funds to provide that free healthcare for the entire population. It's only at that point that medical schemes will cease to exist. If we have the constitutional challenges, which I think there is a strong case for, that Section 33 could be removed. And if Section 33 could be removed, then you'll have a dual system where you'll have an NHI and you'll have your private medical aid and the system doesn't change. And then if you have a tax system whereby it's funded by a payroll tax, then it's a question of, do people actually leave the medical scheme environment to go into the public sector? So let's have a look at it. So if you have a wealthy individual who now has to pay a tax for NHI and pay for the medical scheme, they are likely to stay on a medical scheme. So it's not really, I mean, you're not going to switch now to the public hospital because of the tax, and you'll forego other expenditure. If you are a low to middle income person on a medical scheme and now you have this taxation, your taxation will be lower. So the drop off from medical scheme potentially would be lower. And they might also sacrifice other expenditure so that they don't have private healthcare. And private healthcare has the defensiveness because the public hospitals are not in a good condition. So my view is that if the NHI is able to fund itself through a coalition government, through these high taxes, and to provide the cover, it's an extremely far way out and very expensive. But there's a lot of moving parts that need to happen until you actually get to that outcome.
So would you say then that the recent market reaction actually provides an opportunity for some of the better companies in the market to actually hold exposure or to increase exposure to some of those businesses?
I think so. I think the overreaction by the market is a bit too much. And when NHI was signed, the hospital stocks did not move or fall because it was already priced in. So I think the worst case scenario is already priced into the shares. And if anything, if Section 33 is found to be unconstitutional, it'll be a positive reaction for the entire healthcare sector because medical schemes can exist. But the timeline and feasibility for when medical schemes won't exist, I think it's extremely far too unlikely.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see how this recent legal action plays out. And of course, we'll be keeping a close eye on it. Thanks very much, Dhersan, for your contribution to the conversation. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today.